Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome everyone to the group chat, the bubble tea edition. Because Xin Wei is currently having a bubble tea. But yes, welcome to the group chat. I'm here today together with Xin Wei, and we are going to discuss must-have note-taking skills. All right. So I'm sure that many of you know that note-taking is a super important skill set, because at the same time when you're listening, you have to take down notes. And especially for those who are heading to JC, the lecture format might be something that you might not have experienced before. And this is something that you have to learn to live with, okay? Even for some schools, I know in secondary school, there's even some mass lectures and stuff, right? So how do we make sure that we spend the most efficient use of our time during these lectures and take down notes, right? So Xin Wei, maybe just to get started on this, for yourself, how was that note-taking experience like for you? What do you struggle with the most?
I think there's two kind of note, right? One is like your note taking, and I think there's another kind of note is like the notes that you make for studying. My note taking skills sucks. Like I cannot really multitask very well. If it's something that is very difficult, like I'm just trying to understand, I wouldn't take it down. I would just try to understand first. But now the good thing is that we can just take picture. Like if there is slide, right, then we can just take picture on our phone. But if you are saying about like school notes, like when I'm studying, I will make my own notes for almost every subject. I think every subject I will have my own notes, like whole book of notes. Yeah.
For myself, I'm still okay. I'm not of the stage whereby I cannot multitask at all. So for me, when I'm listening into lecture, I'm still able to jot down notes. But I think moments that I struggle the most, right, is that if it's a too complex a concept and I'm struggling to understand, and when I'm copying down the notes, right, then suddenly it becomes a blockage, and then everything else start to not make sense. I think that's my biggest worry when it comes to note taking, especially in a lecture format whereby we can't really ask questions. Technically we can, but nobody really dare to speak out and ask questions. That is when I think I struggle the most. And I think to just give this podcast a bit more structure, I'd like to start off with sharing some of the goals of note taking, right? So why do you even take notes in the first place? I think what's important to realize here is that taking notes helps you with revision after, right? It's not about at that moment I take down, then for what? Because you can just listen, right? But taking down notes is so that after the lesson, when you recap and you re-look through the content you have been taught, you actually have aids to help you understand what's going on. Because there's a difference between a fresh set of notes versus something that you have some scribbling done. Because those scribbling will help guide your thought process. And when you revise through the second time around, it gets a lot easier. Note taking is also for situations where the teacher value add, right? They say something that's not in the notes that you want to take down and to make sure that the second time when you look at it again is there, right? Because if you just try to remember it, you might forget it, right? So those are why note taking skills are important. Now, of course, note taking is not, say, the easiest skill set to pick up. So maybe I think what we would like to share is some tips that work for us, not only in JC, but I think in uni as well for us, right? Because there's a lot of lectures in uni, how we went about taking notes that might help you currently as you're studying and going through secondary school and JC. Maybe I start with Xin Wei first. Any tips that you'd like to share in terms of note taking?
I think one important thing is to know that if this is not something that it's something that you have challenge following, I think you should drop your pen and just listen. Because sometimes when we are trying to take down notes, there's a lot of things to think about, like where do I write that, what do I write down, and then where do I write it down on the notes and things like that, right? So these are distraction points also. If it's a very difficult thing, I think when you're trying to write down the notes, and if the teacher is going really fast, I think a lot of time you will just be lost. And I think I was quite lucky because in JC, my school, all the lectures are recorded. Yeah, so because of that, let's say if I don't take down the notes, right, I can always just look back the lecture, or I ask my friends, like the copy, the empty part, what do I fill in, things like that. Yeah, I think so I think one tip is that if it is a very challenging topic, you should just listen and then write it down and then write it down. But if there's no time, then you just focus on listening first.
For me, I think this one is a game changer. I feel that the best way to do note taking is before the note taking, you should pre-read the notes. This was a game changer, I tell you. Because, right, if you are looking at the notes for the first time and you're in a lecture and you're trying to learn it, right, trust me, 80% of the time it doesn't make sense, right? So the power of pre-reading the notes is such that you know what is coming your way. In fact, when you pre-read the notes, right, you also don't understand shit. But at least now you know which are the areas that you should look out for, that you should try to listen to more intently to understand. And in a way, that also sets you up in a more classroom format. You are prepared and you know what are the correct questions to ask, right? Like, why is it like that? Can you explain how this example works? So for me, right, after I discovered pre-reading the notes was a game changer, note taking became a lot easier because when I went into the lecture hall, I agak know what's coming my way, right? I preempt myself already. And I also know which are the areas that I need to take down more notes because those are the areas I don't understand. So I thought that having that as a preparation before the actual lecture itself really helped me a lot, especially in uni. With that said, I'm not that hardworking that I pre-read all lah, but at least I try, if I sit down early in the lecture, I try to quickly flip through. So I roughly know which pages are upcoming, which are the rough concepts. But if you have the time for maybe 30 minutes or so, pre-read, right, don't really need to understand everything, but at least you know what's coming your way. Xin Wei, did you have experienced something similar before as well?
I think I laugh because like I totally agree with that, but I never, like I don't do it even I know that is the right way. I think that is definitely 100% the correct way to do it. Because once you pre-read, like what Darrell said, you definitely will understand the words. Like it's an English word, so you definitely understand. It's just that when they're pieced together, because it's a new concept, you don't understand. Let's say econs. There's a lot of new concept in econs. So for sure, just reading the econs notes, right, you're not going to understand much because if you read the econs notes, you understand econs, then you really don't need your econs teacher, right? Because econs is a very new subject. But at least you can read through one time first. That definitely will help. But I think the challenge here is that takes a lot of time. Yeah, that does take a lot of time. But if you really can put in that time to do that, I think I agree. I totally agree that that's a game changer.
Yep. Then down to the more technical aspects of taking notes, right? So during my uni time, what we tried to do was that instead of taking down notes by ourselves, we actually started taking it collectively, like through Google Doc, you know? So we are all annotating on the same piece of note so that when the lecturer is saying something, somebody else already taking that down, the other person can write down something else. So I thought that might be something you guys can do, or you all can take collectively as a whole team, right? Then after the lesson, you all can go and check with each other what you missed out. Some of the more technical stuff might include like taking down notes in different colors, you know, having your post-its to jot down certain stuff quickly and then actually properly annotate it on your notes later on. That could work too. But I think don't be overly distracted with making your notes very nice looking, you know, very colorful and all, especially during the lecture, right? Because that's the portion where you should be absorbing all that information. Yeah. If you want to doodle nice kind, right? Maybe you take it down right after, right? You do on a post-it first, then you transfer it onto your actual notes. But actually, at the end of the day, the whole purpose is to make sure that when you revise later on, you have an easier time. So do it in whatever manner that works for you.
I have one more tip.
Yeah.
But it wasn't for secondary school and JC. It was more for uni. But I think it can help is that I will voice record my lecture. You know, some lectures are not recorded in uni, but so you have to attend. But sometimes you just cannot absorb. Like, because maybe it's an 8 a.m. lecture. So you just can't absorb anything. So I'll be there. I'll be awake, but I cannot really absorb. So I will voice record the lecture. And at least I have something to fall back to when I go back. Yeah.
That's exactly what I did when I was working, right? Then I was tasked to write the minutes for the meeting. And like they go so fast, like what the hell are they talking about? I have no context, right? So I just record the whole thing, then I can play back after slowly, then I can write down whatever I want. I mean, if it works, you know, go for it. But if your school did record the lectures, then you're in it for easier time lah. With that being said, I never really watched my recorded lectures, so whatever. Okay. Anyway, the whole purpose of note taking is so that you can do your learning more effectively. So I think the next portion here in the second half of the podcast, what we'd like to discuss is how do you make your learning more effective, right? Note taking is just one of them. What are some other aspects that you can enhance this whole note taking and absorption of information? I'll start off with one. I think this is similar to the prep work before, which is to pre-read your notes. But I realized that the game changer, even bigger game changer, is to read the notes again after. Okay, the logic here is simple. During the lecture or the lesson stage, right, you're trying to absorb information. But when after the lecture or the lesson, you go and review your notes again, that's the stage where you're internalizing and absorbing the information. Typically, for the first time when you're receiving information, you don't really understand one. You're just like taking it at face value, like, okay, oh, cool. So what the hell is functions, right? You still don't really get it. Okay. But it's after the lecture when you open your notes again, this time around, you actually have time to slowly think about it. That's when you're able to synthesize that information, to try to understand the logic of what's being taught. That is the time when you truly learn. And I think that is the portion whereby when we talk about effective learning, how you can have that's how you study smart actually, right? After the lecture, on the way back home, on your train ride or your car ride back, go and look at the notes again. That is when you truly internalize it. Trust me, if you're only planning to listen to your lecturer once and you are saying that you can learn everything, you're just lying to yourself. It's not possible. So in fact, after the post-session synthesizing of information is where you truly learn the most. Xin Wei, do you have a similar experience as this?
Yeah, I think for sure. And don't make that period too long. Like maybe immediately it's not possible because like you have another lesson, but it can be like within the 1-2 days. Because if it's like 1 week or like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe that's just too long. Like you already forget everything there, right? So I think don't make that too long. And another thing I think kind of similar is that because you mentioned about synthesizing information, right? I think another thing is like, you know, those like students usually I don't know nowadays, but last time a lot of my friends like to make their own notes. And I also do make my own notes. But my notes is just like all pen ink, like no pretty stuff. I think it's very important to note that when you're doing your own notes, don't just copy paste. Like you open a book, the textbook, and then you open your foolscap paper to make notes. Then you just copy. I don't think that is like note making, like correct note making. I think you should read through that and then use your own words to write it down. So that is also another layer of like effective learning. Like you read it and then you process it and then you write it down in your own way. I think that is also kind of, I think that is also an important part of effective learning, which is like you internalize the information and then you reprocess it. It may not need to be like super intense like reprocess. It can just be like, oh, I read this sentence and I just use my own way to write it out. It could just be like a few words different. And I think that can also make learning, especially learning concept that's very foreign, quite helpful. Yeah.
I think just adding on to that point, right, that rewriting your notes, I think that was something that I do, but after a certain point, right, I found that to be too time consuming, right? Because like when I need to take, like I already have the notes, but I want to do it in my own version, it takes a little bit of effort lah because it takes time. While I feel like that process gives me a very tangible way of measuring my progress, right, I eventually found it to be not the most effective way. Right. So instead, I went back and I relied on resources that I could find from my school, or to buy those small summary booklets from Popular. I think those were quite helpful too, because it synthesizes whatever you need to know into a small booklet.
Buy our curated notes.
Yes. Not plugging in anything, but our curated notes are very concise. Okay,
no,
but
because I really don't like textbook, right? So that's why I agree. It takes so much time. So I would never do it if it's like before exam or anything. Like it's more like maybe if I would definitely never do it like before like prelim or mid-year exam. It will be like maybe during quiz, like just normal school time. It shouldn't be something that like the last 2 weeks then you are still chonging your notes. It shouldn't be something like that. So I didn't like textbook, and last time my secondary school didn't really have those compiled notes. And even my JC, even though they gave notes, but they had a lot of like extra information that that it will never come out in exam. So I took it upon my own hand to create notes that have like only essential exam information. Yeah, but I do agree that it is very time consuming. If you want to do that, you need a lot of time. Like you need to do it way before exam. So this isn't about like pre-exam thing. This should be like way before exam what I mentioned just now. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think something else you can do, especially after you are done taking notes and revising through the notes. One quick cheat code is that I used to just take out my TYS and I look at the question, then I read through the answer sheet. I thought that was a pretty good way, because while we talk about the gap between content and application, right? You need to know, once you synthesize that knowledge and that information, you also need to know how it can be tested. So something that I found to be effective, given my lazy nature when it comes to studying, right? I always try to find the most efficient path, right? So I'm a bit lazy to do a lot of practices. So what I do is I look at a question, I think, okay, this is the way to solve it, or these are the keywords that I'll need to include in my answer. Then I go and take a look at the answer sheet to see how far I am off and stuff. So that in a way was another round of revision itself. Or in a sense, if there's work examples inside the notes, which good notes should have, you can also use those work examples as practice. Then you can really try and see, like, I learned this concept, were I able to apply it? Right. So I think it's very important to have that aspect of trying practices after to apply your knowledge. So you need to think of knowledge acquiring as a complete cycle, right? It starts with first absorbing information at face value. Okay, this is what you tell me as the truth. I get it. Okay, I kind of get it now. Then, to start off with, you should be trying to pre-read first, right? Figuring out what you're supposed to learn. Then you learn it at face value. After that, you try to absorb it. Then you try to apply it. The moment you're able to apply it, you complete the loop. Then you sort of have the information inside you. It's like your software upgraded, right? You're like iPhone, now your ISO, new ISO, you're like upgraded version instead of trying to memorize and regurgitate. So I think that is a cycle that you should keep in mind. The pre, the during, the after, and the application. If you manage to nail that down, right, you have a very easy time learning new stuff. Okay. But I think let's go down to our favorite portion of the podcast, right? The dilemma. All right. So I think Xin Wei kind of addressed this, but I'm just gonna try and put you in a spot. Let's say you're only in a position to either listen or to take down notes, and there is no recorded lecture. Which one would you do?
If there's no recorded lecture, actually, if there's no recorded lecture, I think really, okay, I know it depends is a bad thing, but like, for example, for subject like humanities subject, bio, I would actually just take down notes first. Like, especially if I don't have the notes, I need the information, I would just take down first. Because I think that kind is like easier to study. But for math, like step by step, maybe it's better to like follow what the teacher is going through. Yeah. So it depends, like, is it a complex content that I couldn't really understand, or something that once I take down, I read, I think I should be able to understand. Yeah.
Okay, for my answer, right, I'll go about it in a more roundabout way. I would say it depends on the teacher. So if my teacher is some godlike teacher, right, that provides so much value, right, hell, I'm just gonna listen, right? Because if I listen, then everything makes sense, then I'm done already, right? But if my teacher is like not the most experienced, not the most good, and they don't really make much sense, right, I think it would be safer to take down notes so that I can study myself after. Okay, but the reality is that I'm pretty much a more independent learner. That is what I understand of myself. So for me, right, listening in lecture works only to a certain extent because I need to figure out everything by myself. That is the barrier that I need to overcome. So typically in lecture, I actually lean more towards taking notes because after that, when I study myself, that's when I do most of the understanding. Most of the time when I listen to my teachers, unfortunately, not all of them are very good too. So I don't really understand what they're talking about. So I usually spend time after to figure it out myself. But then I also try to ask questions in in class, so that I'm able to clarify those doubts. But that's just me lah. I think it's important to figure out who you are as a learner and to decide whether taking down notes or listening is more important. Okay. And I think with that, Xin Wei, you have anything else to share?
this is quite specific. This is a quite a specific topic. But I think so that's why everyone will have their own style. So you know those kind of students that copy everything down in their notes. Just don't be like that. Just don't be like that.
Yeah, and don't be the one that also pays too much attention to making your notes nice, especially during the stage where you're listening and you're trying to copy down, right? Screw it, just take down whatever you need to take down.
Yeah.
All right. Then after that, you can organize it to look nicer. Don't be too caught up in the aesthetics, because the aesthetics.
Even if after lecture, right? Also, don't be too caught up. Like, I think I think maybe it's interest also. Some of my students will draw like bio got the heart structure. They will really trace that out like super nicely.
Feels good,
maybe yeah, I know it feels good but don't do it for every subject. Really not worth the time.
Yeah, I think that is something to keep in mind. So, what's the most efficient use of your time? So, while I do feel making notes help, I don't think it should be at a very large expense of your time. Because if that time can be better used to do revisions and practices, it might be better off. Because after you're done with your O level or A level, you're not going to look at the notes again. So, no matter how pretty it is, right? Pretty doesn't mean effective. So, but if it's pretty and effective, go ahead, man. Strongly encourage, okay? But don't spend too much time on the aesthetics. I think maybe that's just on a final note as we end off this podcast. All right. So big shout out to everyone entering a new stage. All right. If you're Sec 3, Sec 4, J1, J2, we hope that whatever we shared today would help you have a better time taking down notes in school. Discover what is your true style of learning. I think that's most important. All right. So with that, we come to the end of today's podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and give it a like. It will help with the YouTube algorithm. I know not many people watch our video, but even if we are able to impact one more student just because of the algorithm, I think it's totally worth the effort. So give us a like, and we look forward to bringing you more exciting content that's relevant to your student life. And we'll see you in the next podcast, everyone.
Bye-bye.
It sound right, boy.